the Grey Hat Beard podcast. Hello and welcome to part 2 of Grey Hat Beard show 23. Listen to part 1 if you haven't already, where we talked about the latest news and talked about some of the great events that we've got coming up. But now we're going to get private, because part 2 is about privacy, to be or not to be. That's enough of my Shakespearean. Al, over to you.
God, what an introduction that is. I guess this is based on a couple of things that have come up recently. So there's been, I guess, some negative responses to the fact that Microsoft now have what they're calling productivity score. And a lot of people are looking at it saying, actually, it's the ability for managers to spy on their staff. And it, you know, if you've listened to some of the previous shows, you'll know that I'm very interested in productivity and some of the workplace analytics and things. And it's been quite interesting looking at how organizations are looking at this and how the media has responded to this as well. Because this is something it's interesting with productivity score because it does give you that information, but it also restricts who can access it and you have to switch it on. And I think it opens up those questions again around privacy, around what we should be seeing, what should be made available to us. Because with the big brother to productivity score, the workplace analytics piece, that is anonymized. You specifically cannot see information around an individual. It's designed not to actually allow you to see an individual's data. But the productivity score...
Just very quickly, what is the productivity score? What sort of things is it looking at?
So productivity score is looking at things like how much you're actually using different devices, using different tools, how many emails you're sending with attachments, using the different types of devices that you're using. So it's really trying to measure what you're doing in terms of making it, I guess, the bar is set
by Microsoft. How much you're collaborating, I think, comes into it, isn't it? How much you're connecting with, how many different people you're connecting with. That sort of,
but it's quite rigid in terms of what they actually put out there, because it's defined. You can't tailor it or anything. But the thing that it gives, which is causing all the concern, is it gives you a breakdown. It gives you a list against each individual, whereas the workplace analytics doesn't do that. And that's why people are kind of responding to it negatively, kind of saying, well, actually, should that information be available? Because if they didn't have the breakdown, then you wouldn't know who to speak to say, well, actually, you should be maybe increasing your use of attachments, or, you know, start joining meetings and using video. You know, it's things like that it's trying to increase. But yeah, the response is quite negative, and for good reason in some respects. But it does open that question around, you know, things like GDPR. You know, what information should be available? Just before, you know, preparing for this, as we do at the last minute, because, you know, we're all organised. I saw that Microsoft have filed a patent around identifying using body language in meetings, which just opens up even more. You know, if you're concerned that somebody can see, you know, when you're sending an email with an attachment, or when you're using Teams on your mobile device, just imagine what it means when you can actually see your face and record it as an emotion to say how engaged you are, and, you know, read your body language. It just raises all of these questions around the information that's being captured. How should it be made available? Because Microsoft are trying to do this as a positivity thing. You know, the workplace analytics is about well-being. It's about identifying how you can identify people who are, you know, maybe suffering because they're not collaborating as much. They're being overworked because they have too many meetings. You know, they're not working productively, and so therefore might be at risk of burning out. So they're coming at it from a positive way. But obviously there's the other side. I think
you said, yeah, how should it be used? Absolutely. The question is, how will it be used? And as someone who goes through an hour, sometimes closer to 2 hours of video with a lot of him talking to there, and tries to get a screenshot every now and then, it's very interesting. And when you upload videos to stream to YouTube, it kind of picks a nice point to use as the video that shows there. And the kind of number of times that it looks like one of us is half asleep, that one of us is really bored, that one of us is just falling to pieces on there. Because if you take that single snapshot, it can look very different. And usually it's just Gary that actually is, not all of us. But no, it's. Sorry, I feel like I'm really picking on bad Gary. I haven't meant it today. But you take that snapshot. If with great power comes great responsibility, you can interpret an image, a single piece of information in a certain way, and you shouldn't, but people may do and may fixate on certain things. So to get to that detailed level gives a lot of capability for managers to do the wrong thing.
But it does depend whether those managers have access to it. And I think this, and I think this is the thing. The productivity score is accessible through the admin center. So it's through the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. You need global reporter or report reader rights to see it. So it's a very high level of permissions that you're giving. And I think that's there are balances that can be put in place. If they are or not is another matter. And I think, as you say, people will always use information to their advantage. They won't necessarily read it, being a balanced view of the world. They will make their own assumptions. They will see the standout numbers, not really correlate them. There's all sorts of biases that we're naturally open to when we look at information. But I think the key thing here is that it lists each individual person and says, right, so these are the stats that you've got for each individual person, as opposed to anonymizing it and making it, team level, for example. Okay, minimum size of team, 7 people. That's the lowest level that you will get to in workplace analytics, for example. It aggregates up to that level and then doesn't allow you to drill down any lower than that.
I was quite surprised with productivity score that it did go down to that low level on there. I think probably because I was thinking of workplace analytics and thinking, Microsoft wouldn't do that. And I remember when the workplace analytics, and I'm trying to remember what it was originally called, but they very much said, no, we're going to be aggregating this data. It's not going to go down to that lower level. So for productivity score to put that up and make it available, I think you probably want to see your own to that low level. Just you wouldn't want necessarily other people to see that you could look at your own behavior and see how that is adjusting. Absolutely.
That kind of information is, I use my analytics, and that's telling me a lot of that. I get the Monday morning email, which we got today, about what's my week like, how much time have I averaged focusing and collaborating, and just give you that pointer to say, actually, have I collaborated enough? Do I need to increase that? Do I actually need to increase my focus time because I've been in too many meetings? That's good. That's useful information. It's a good reminder, of when you're working week by week, to just kind of put your head up and look around and then try and adjust your working week. I think, definitely. I was surprised to see that it was very much personal, because we talked about productivity score, and it always looked to me as if it was organizational level. Like, you want to increase the use, decrease the use of emails and things like that. It's always been aimed at that level. I mean, I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because whilst it could be abused, it could also be useful in some cases as well. In scenarios where people are now working from home, they feel a bit more disconnected. Organizations wanting to make sure that employees are safe and fine, and different management styles. People have different approaches. Some of them, may not be as okay. So, this is a perfect example of watching.
I mean, this is a great example of you can do things to check, but there were quite a few articles like this during the pandemic, with managers worried that people working from home were not doing enough work. And so what they would do is set up software that would track the keystrokes, mouse movements, website visited. It would take snapshots to make, even on the camera, to make sure someone was there. And there was a lot of stories like this. And I'll admit, I was terrified about that. we're lucky that actually we will look at what the output is. What is the output of the work you do? Are you delivering against what the expectations are? And that to me seems like the obvious way to do things. But there are a lot of people that purely the time on seat, the having your face seen, being there at the right time, drives what they think is doing hard work and doing good work, which is odd. And I think different people have different expectations.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to things like the workplace analytics, I know Microsoft are using this information a lot, as general trends to say how organizations are working, but also as a society how we're working as well, and how things like the pandemic are impacting our productivity, our working habits, which is they're probably one of the few organizations that has that level of data to actually generate those insights into how we as a society are changing. And I think when you start to distill it down, as with things like the NHS data, if you've ever done any reporting around NHS data, there are certain points where you can't go any lower because you identify an individual. And with workplace analytics, they've taken those same rules, those same approaches to say, actually, we will not go down that low. And they've addressed it in terms of, in Europe where you get workers' councils and things like that. They've addressed union concerns for these sorts of accusations. And then they've got productivity score, which just kind of throws all of that out the window. And you kind of go, oh, you could have been such a better place if you just hadn't put that one little part at the bottom that has that breakdown by individual. Because, as you said, individuals on their own, this stuff isn't really going to help them. It's more as a team, how do you work? And they don't break it down at the productivity score level. And I think that's part of the challenge, that they've kind of missed a trick by not breaking it down.
I think you do need to break it down a bit, because some departments will behave differently to others and should behave differently. People who are out on the move are going to use more devices and be more mobile based, and that's correct. People who are there at their desk in the olden days all the time won't need to use so many of their different devices and shouldn't have to. So breaking it down into different areas, it is useful. It's just, as you say, not down to that very individual.
Not down. But if you look at a finance team, and you compare a finance team to a professional services team, for example, you would expect the number of meetings to be different and the type of engagement, because traditionally, a finance team might have been sat at the same bank of desks in the office all the time, whereas the professional services teams may be out and about and all over the place all the time. It was always very difficult to measure adoption if you compare apples and pears and say they should all be using the same tools. And I think that's part of the way the tool can be used, but it's also part of the reason why you do need a bit more granularity.
And it kind of comes through. I know in the notes, Al, you sort of talked about then looking at e-discovery and log and audit files and things, and it makes you wonder how much you do at work is owned by work. Is it okay? But because for years people have had access to all your emails. And people have sent through all sorts of emails because they send to their family and things like that. Especially when you've worked at the same place for a while, you tend to start getting used to putting your email through there. Hopefully, more and more people have stopped doing that as people have had mobile phones more often. But there must be a huge amount of content, and you chat with people at work as well. How much of that is available to others?
I mean, I think this is the thing, isn't it? What we're talking about here is one set of information that, because it has individual names, it's been highlighted. But again, come back to the level of permissions that you need to actually access it in the first place is actually quite high. It's not a level of permissions that you just kind of go, okay, my manager can give that to me. You need to be elevated permissions, which theoretically should be locked down and using privileged identity management and things like that. And this is something that needs to be understood, is that there are those checks and balances in place. But when it comes to, IT administrators have always had a little bit more of a godlike set of permissions. Whether they should have it or not, it's another matter, and we're not going to get into that now. But you do have things like e-discovery. You do have things, the auditing, that your organization could be monitoring what you're doing, but not at an action by action, but at a, oh, well, you're downloading 25 files. Okay, that's quite a lot of downloading. We'll set up an automated alert on that to make sure that, you know, we understand why, or you're deleting a lot of files. Your actions are always being monitored, and it's just a matter of how that information's being used. In this case, Microsoft are trying to use it in a positive way, but it's kind of backfired massively.
And I do, if I'm honest, I do feel slightly unfairly. I feel they've jumped onto an obvious topic to a certain degree, and I like it that it's challenging Microsoft to make sure that they prove they're doing the right thing. That is the good side, but there is a certain notion of, well, there's an easy story here. There's privacy involved. There's Microsoft with new technology. Boom, let's go on that. Slightly related subject. I noticed on my Google News feeds, things popped up saying Microsoft kills off Microsoft Teams for millions of users, and I was like, really? Yeah, that sounds odd. No, what they mean is they're stopping people using a legacy browser that's not being used much, and stopped it being supported on there in a very sensible way from it. But you kind of, it's easy to get a nice headline that grabs the attention, and I think this has grabbed the attention, certainly.
It has, and I think but it is one of those things that it's grabbed the attention because it's easy, as you say, and you know, it's not breaking any GDPR laws. You know, it's down to the organization to manage how they use their own information. And all of this is available. You know, they could share their audit logs with everybody in the organization. That would be probably more damaging, but it's the same kind of thing.
I think, I'm definitely on both sides. It's kind of like, it's very easy to go at, but I do think that some of this information can be used for the good of employees within an organization. It can certainly help you reflect on what your organization actually is, as opposed to what you think it is, and have that.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. I agree.
Put your head, out the top and have a look around. It's very easy to just think we're this type of company, and the reality is something different. But yeah, I mean, it comes back to the governance around, you know, who can see what. You know, we've got lots of kind of roles up there. Global administrator for, say, Office 365, or global administrator for Azure. There's tons of roles in there, and it should be looking at what these roles do and making sure that people have the appropriate level of access. You know, the things that you're talking about, Al, you know, I'm looking at this, it's a compliance officer kind of roles. It is that high level. It's not just, you know, just someone sat in an office. It's someone who already has a responsibility for the organization. So,
but it's also why are they looking at the data? Because a compliance officer, there are rules you have to meet. But if you look at productivity score, someone within the HR or digital workplace type function will be looking at this. Should they be able to access? And it can be a very senior HR person, but it's then a very different topic. Why are you trying to look at that data? If we look at the discovery, trying to find out if someone has breached regulations. Yeah, that would sit within the HR, especially the sort of HR legal area that often crosses over. But if you're looking to see, are we getting every single performance out of our staff that we possibly can, you've got a slightly different question to be asked, really.
Yeah, and I think it all does come down to, you know, if I want permissions, I should have to say, why do I want those permissions? What am I going to use? And do I need them permanently, or am I taking a snapshot, you know, for some particular purpose? But, you know, as with all sensitive information, it needs to have governance around it so that the people who are going to make use of it for legitimate business means, they have access to it and others don't. And it's, you know, it's not being used maliciously, even by people internally. And I think, you know, this is the sort of common rules that all information should be governed by, not just this particular information.
Yeah, I mean, a great example I saw Barclays was in the news back in February, and looking at this in hindsight, it's quite entertaining now. But they scrapped their tracking system, and I used to work at Barclays. I remember they were talking about this a long time ago, because they wanted to understand how desks were used, and especially as people were starting to do a bit more working from home, being a bit more fluid in the way that they sort of travel between desks and looking at hot desking things, to be able to understand whether desks were being used. Because you could log into a desk, but if no one was sat there, was it actually being used, or were the meeting rooms more in place? I remember many days where I'd spend the whole day in the meeting room. I'd come back, pick up my laptop or pick up a charger, head back to another meeting room. And so that ability to be able to track and understand how their desks are used was really important, something I looked at. Now, unfortunately, when you talk about that, that could also possibly track how long you spend in the toilet and how long you spend getting a cup of coffee and things like that. So at what point does that data become valid? What point is it worthwhile, interesting, useful stats? And at what point is it Big Brother? Just as an aside, I have a feeling I know him. I've just looked back at this one. And you know, again, looking at this, how things now have changed as well. That tracking at desks has been replaced really by tracking people at home, and the different capabilities and different tools that are going on. It's still the same idea, different places.
Yeah, it's depending on what the data's being used for. It can be really productive, and it can provide deep insights into how your organization works, or it can be used for, you know, more malicious means, either, you know, by malicious players or actually with a business case in mind. You know, it's always challenging, this type of information.
So I think it's a good reminder for all of us when we're creating these systems to think about, why is that data used? Why do you need to track those things? We've all involved in analytics parts of projects, understanding where we do a lot with change and adoption, to understand where people are using things and be able to speak to them, understand why not, is absolutely vital. But you know what? That's a bit of invasion of privacy. Why aren't you using my brand new system that I've spent ages developing and making? You know, come on, give me an answer, quick. But
the answer could be, it's not very good, and it doesn't solve my problem. Which is then, it doesn't matter how many analytics you've got. That's what could be happening, right? And, you know, just because you've built it doesn't mean people will use it and love using it. It's, you know,
it all comes down to the question that you're asking of the data.
Yeah.
You know, at least you have the ability to ask the questions, even if you know, are securing who can ask those questions and how they can ask those questions. You know, it's within our means to restrict who can have access. And that's something that organizations should always be wary of. We can always restrict who has access to it. And I think with productivity score, we can turn it off as well.
Absolutely.
And it is off, though, as default.
It is off.
You have to turn it on.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Which I think is a really important point. It's not there. I mean, having said that, all the things being monitored are there in the back end logs, so you could probably reverse engineer them anyway. But that's a different topic entirely.
I was just on point about this, though, because we're having this discussion now, and obviously we're aware of this because, you know, we like to chat about these things. If you're just working in, you know, an organization that's using Office 365, Microsoft 365, are you even aware of these things? Is there anything that's saying to you, oh, by the way, you know, when you're logging in, you go to a website, you consent to, you know, the various things that are on your screen every time you go to a new website, you're being made aware that your consent is being required, whereas you're at work, does it needs to be more visible, I think, is it, to get that confidence? If there's more and more things going on in the background, people are generally going to be more suspicious, aren't they? But if it's a bit more open, a bit more, this is what we're doing, these are the reasons why we're doing it.
But it's right, productivity score is on or off. You can't turn it on for some people and off for others, can you?
It's organization level.
Yeah. So yeah, Gary, we can ask you if you're comfortable with it. Unfortunately, tough.
Yeah, I think
just in case it gets picked up, but yeah.
Yeah, I think in most cases it would probably come under contractual agreements.
Yeah.
Which is, but you're right. I mean, it would be better for you to be able to say, actually, look, this is what we're doing, you know, and to actually promote that information, you know. I think this is part of it around this information is, you know, you wouldn't want to promote it as, well, here's the individual scores. You'd want to promote it as, actually, look, we've mapped it to the HR team structure, the organizational structure, and, you know, this is what we're comfortable showing.
Yeah, I guess I didn't mean necessarily showing the information, but just making people aware of, you know, it's like you log into a system and generally it will come up and say, you know, by logging into the system, you agree to X, Y, and Z, you know,
but
usage
by recording this meeting in Teams, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, those kind of things, just to make people just generally more aware that these things are actually happening, that systems are capable of this. You know, it's very easy for us to talk from a systems perspective, but not everyone thinks that way. They're just doing the job, right?
Then I think, you know, we view it differently because we know, you know, what kind of signals are being stored, what can be stored, how they might be used to diagnose problems. You know, I've always remember having a scenario where we were logging where people were logging in from and their IP addresses, and we needed that for diagnosis.
Exactly that.
You know,
for security, you need to know that were they actually
are they a whitelisted IP address or a black? You know, and you know, that kind of level of information is super personal. Well, actually, I can trace you back to where you are and, you know, physically where you are, but that was key information. And, you know, the terms and conditions for using that software included that we will capture that kind of information for diagnosing things, because we used to always have people, oh, well, they're signing in from Paris and they're signing in from Warsaw. Oh yeah, but they're getting different experiences. Why is that? Well, we've just seen that they're signing in with the same address, you know. So there's all sorts of information that systems capture. And you're probably right, Gary, that actually awareness of what information is being captured, you know, is, most people are blissfully ignorant of the information, except in situations like this, where all of a sudden somebody picks up on it and goes, oh, look, they've got your name. If they had your IP address and not your name, it wouldn't be the same issue.
Well, I think on that note, we'll wrap up. It's probably time to say I've been running sentiment analytics on this video. And it says that Kev's had a really busy day and is fed up and really wants to finish off the sweets he started just before recording. It says that Gary's fed up and doesn't want any more workshop, and Al is really hungry. How's it done? Is it been all right?
It's done pretty well.
That's pretty good.
Now, where did it send the data to do that analysis?
Oh, I'll send it to Google. It's fine.
That's fine.
They handle everything.
It won't go anywhere after that then.
Oh, sorry, and Facebook and
I'm looking forward to those targeted ads.
Absolutely. Well, let's not go into advertising, but no, I think it's interesting, and I think it's important people challenge themselves, say, why are you keeping your data? What are you doing with it? Is there a good reason for you to do that? Another great example of we've recently moved platform for the podcast, and I find myself going, oh, the location goes down to towns in some place. And I wonder who that is. Oh, I wonder who that is. And you have to stop. There is no need for you to know to that
You've
level of
just lost us, all our listeners now.
Berkshire somewhere. So, but it is that level, and you know, you were talking about that NHS information. There's quite a lot you can infer from various sources of data as to work out who people are. So making sure you think about that when you're creating your systems is absolutely vital. But don't let it stop you doing some cool stuff. Do it for good reasons, and you can get some really impressive solutions out from it. Because I still think Productivity Score is a really nice bit of kit.
Mm-hmm. I think Workplace Analytics is even cooler.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's another show, I think.
I think that is another show.
So we are hoping. I think we're going to get. Is it one more or two more shows? Certainly one more show in before Christmas. before there, and then we'll talk about what we fit in between Christmas and New Year, or whether we go into 2021. But the plan is for the next show to be a bit like some of our panel sessions. So for those who saw us at Commsverse or come and join us at Collab Days Munich, we're going to look back on the year. So we're going to look at all the, I was going to say good things, all the things that have happened this year, all the news that's come out on there, and then maybe look a little bit forward about what our predictions will be. And we'll hopefully have one or two, maybe even three, depending how we're going, special guests who will come and join us as well and share that. And I will have my little buzzer app out to keep some scores as well. Might even have a round of Defend the Indefensible.
We have to.
It's
the rules.
Absolutely. So keep an ear out for that. We're coming out in a couple of weeks' time. Otherwise, I think we'll wrap up. Thank you very much for joining us. I've been Gray.
I've been Hat.
I've been Beard.
Thanks very much. See you in a couple of weeks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Grey Hat Beard podcast. The song Drink Up My Mateys was brought to you by Black Bones under a non-commercial attribution license.